Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. Today, I am here with Dr. Erin Weiner, a board-certified psychologist and addiction specialist who speaks nationally on the topics of addiction, behavioral health, and the impact of drug policy on public health. Dr. Weiner is the president-elect of the Society of Addiction Psychology and on the Science Advisory Board for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. So thanks for being here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I wanted to get on the phone with you because I have 5 kids and they all tell me that weed is no big deal. And
So they must be right. They outnumber you.
Well, I mean, the truth is that some of them are adult enough that I don't get a vote. And you know, one of them is just a year away from that story where it's not even illegal for them to use. So what I want to know is, you know, there's kind of this sentiment amongst my kids and their friends that it's like having a glass of wine. Should we be worried differently about the usage of marijuana with our teenagers in particular?
So I think so. And the reason why I think so has a lot to do with the science. And there's a number of differences. There's a lot of comparisons made between marijuana and alcohol, usually in the direction of saying, well, like, at least they're not drinking, or even that, like, we can compare how THC works in the body to how alcohol works in the body. But they're actually very different substances. They're very different drugs. And we know specifically a lot about THC that is very harmful for the developing mind under the age of 25 in particular, and certainly when you're a teenager. And we can certainly go deeper into it, but absolutely it's something to worry about, and it's something to be encouraging them not to do.
Okay, so Sahar says that's because every media they follow tells them weed is okay or glorifies it through social media influencers. I would agree. It's out there as being no big deal at all. So out there also is that all kids are using. And I mean, there's never an all for anything, but that sentiment is really out there, which probably puts a little bit of pressure on kids who aren't doing or don't want to do. Are the bulk of teenagers actually using weed?
Briefly, no. So our perceptions are very much shaped by the social ecosystem that we're inside. And sometimes it can feel like something is really common because it is with the people we're around. But in actuality, if we poke our head out of that bubble, we'll find that most people are behaving very differently. A really great example I could think of was I've actually worked with some people recently around cocaine who feel like everybody uses cocaine, but actually the base rate in the United States right now is under 1%. And so when you look around your circle and it seems like, oh, everybody's doing it, well, it's because those are the people that you've surrounded yourself with and you're part of that subculture. Statistically right now, the data that we have nationally says that for high school seniors, which are of course the oldest of the bunch and the ones who tend to use substances the most, the rate that we have is in the past month only about 15%, or 1.5 out of 10 high school seniors has used marijuana in the last month nationally. So it's a lot lower than people think.
Wow. Why do you think kids are using it? Is it to self-medicate? Is it purely recreational? And what's the difference? It doesn't matter what the difference is.
Yeah, well, so in terms of how to affect behavior, it definitely matters. Why someone is doing something like using a substance that ultimately is harmful matters, because you have to either they have to internally or externally we have to make the argument for why to change behavior. But I'd say that what I hear the most for young people is some combination of dealing with some sort of either internal stressor like anxiety about just social anxiety, school-related anxiety, generalized anxiety. Trauma is a big one if someone's been through some sort of abuse as a child. Depression is another one, to self-medicate, or like you said, to fit in. And particularly when we're talking about high school years, there's a big draw to want to be part of something and to have a friendship network. And if you're either trying to fit in with a new group of people and they're all using substances, or maybe your old group has moved in that direction and you don't want to be on the outside looking in at all your friends, there's a huge amount of pressure to conform and to use, even if it's not physically the healthiest thing to do.
Okay, I want to say that Sahar says that every media they follow tells them weed is okay or glorifies it through social. Oh, no, that was the first one. Nothing we parent or experts say would compete with that info. And literally every teen I know either smokes regularly has dabbled. So you're saying that we have a little bit of a skewed perception of what everybody's doing based on our world. Kristen says that it's so important. And Kristen, if you want to elaborate, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. So this is really hard if our kids are using. Does it matter what the motivation is? Should we try to parse out, are they self-medicating or is this social pressure? And in the end, does it really matter?
Well, so the difference again is about, if you want them to change, we have to get at the root cause. So an axiom that I like to use, and actually I shouldn't take credit for this, it's from dialectical behavioral therapy, but it's that all behavior has a purpose. There's a reason behind it. So if you have a child, for example, and you've expressed to your child that you don't approve of using substances, there might even be consequences that you're giving for using substances, but the behavior is continuing. That means that actually in their cost benefit analysis, they still see it as more to their advantage to incur those consequences and to keep using than to work with you and to change. And so to change that around, like, that calculus has to move. So if you don't understand the why, you're not going to be able to elicit that behavioral change. You can't, you oftentimes can't just punish your way out of this unless someone's just sitting on the bubble. But even then, they go off to college and you're not there anymore. What are they going to do, right? So it's really about, again, getting to the heart of the issue and coming up with a different solution for the heart of the issue than the substance.
Can you tell us an example of what that could look like? We can't punish our way out of this, but what is effective?
Here's the scenario, right? So if we go back to that example I was giving, where you've got a parent of say a teenager who is using THC products, who's vaping THC, who's using weed, and say they're using it because they're feeling a tremendous amount of anxiety or stress. And the relief that they're getting from that, and maybe the social acceptance, matters more to them than whatever happens between them and their parents. The first thing to do is recognize, if you're not reinforcing positive behavior, you're missing the most important part of the equation. A lot of times we really key in on the negative behaviors that we don't want to see and try to disincentivize those with punishments. But we know from a lot of behavioral change research that it's a lot better to reinforce behaviors you want to see than to try to punish behaviors that you don't. And so a lot of times parents, particularly with a child who's struggling with this, will just hyper focus on, like, not making it back by curfew or attitude problems or using the substance. Those things matter, but at the same time, you need to provide that incentive for working with you. There actually has to be a tangible benefit, not just avoiding the consequence or discomfort. And then on the other side, well, if the child is having anxiety problems, are they seeing a therapist? Are they doing some of the really just like top level, most effective interventions for anxiety, like exercise, meditation, deep breathing exercises? Are they using, or do they have a replacement strategy? Because if you take the THC away and then they're just left with their anxiety, it's probably going to call out to them really strongly and they're going to make their way back. So it's that sort of way of addressing the problem, trying to get at the root cause, but also looking at the system that's around them and try to switch those incentives around so that they want to work with you rather than want to hide their behavior from you.
So it sounds so lovely. And in your scenario, the kid misses curfew, they come home high, and we as parents should find a way to recognize the good. How does that work in that particular scenario?
Well, so this is a very individual sort of situation. Sometimes you can shape change at home by changing the system. There can be, essentially, you want to create a cause and effect with your child and make it under their control. It's not just like, oh, my parents are this, my parents are that. But if I do this, one thing happens. If I do another thing happens. And so if you've got a child who's still in a place where they can say, what I really want is to have my anxiety taken care of. And my parents are telling me, like, that I can try therapy, that I can work with a psychiatrist, that I can do all these other things. And if I do that, here are the benefits that are going to come with that. Maybe they'll give it a try. And then as long as you're consistent with that reinforcement, as well as having boundaries and consequences, because that's important too, they change. If not, though, that's sometimes where you have to step things up a notch and not just say, for example, work with an outpatient therapist, but actually send them to a program for what's called dual diagnosis, which is if there's an emotional problem and an addiction problem going on at the same time, like an intensive outpatient program for 3 hours a day, or it's called a partial hospitalization program for 6 hours a day, or even a residential program. There's an escalating curve essentially of treatment available if it seems like a young person can't change their behavior within a certain system. Sometimes you have to remove them from that system in order to make that base level change that then they can carry back with them when they reinsert themselves into that system again.
All right. Well, that's a great segue to the next question. How do we know when it's gotten to that point? So Sahar's saying she's tried a whole host of things and nothing is working with her kid. What are the signs for us as parents to say it's escalated to a point where you need something else?
So I think, actually, so what Sahar was saying about I've tried these things and nothing seems to work, that's your best litmus test. If you're trying something, or if, say, you've got a current trajectory, right? Like take current behavior, project it out 3 years, where does it go? If it seems like it's going down the toilet, then that's not good, right? So it means to try something new, either with a parenting approach, with a treatment approach, with something. You try something new. If it doesn't work, maybe you try something else new. But at a certain point, if it seems like, particularly if there are these components about, like, say, the social network, for example, or even sometimes just parenting, how you're doing, if you haven't had parenting coaching before, that seems to be anchoring this in place. Sometimes you do need to then take the child out of that system for them to learn a different way of engaging with themselves and the world around them. So if something's not working for a while, like say a couple weeks, a month, and you're not seeing any positive signs, it's not an indication to just keep trying the same thing. That's when it's time to try something new.
Well, we know how hard it is to change, and it's especially hard to change if the environment doesn't change at all with us, right? Like that's what contributed to it. But are there any signs of behavior that a parent might be wondering if something's going on, but these would be indicators to them that they probably need to delve a little deeper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you could look for. For example, like if we don't want to start externally, if it seems like a child's friends groups have changed, but you haven't met the new friends, that could be a sign that they're trying to keep that from you. Certainly, hopefully, all parents are checking in and are connected to their children's social media. That's critical because there's so many things that get posted there that will give you insights into what their friends are doing, what's normalized for them, even potentially what they're doing. Sometimes there's wardrobe changes as well. Kids communicate with their clothes a lot. So if it seems like they're trying to enter a different subculture group that's highly affiliated with that, if they're suddenly having trouble at school, suddenly isolating a lot, asking to go to the bathroom a lot, if they have either too little money, might mean that they're buying substances, or too much might mean that they're kind of like middlemen drug dealers, which we see a lot in schools as well. There's a lot of different things that you could look for if they're having a problem. But generally speaking, you're going to see it across multiple areas. You'll see it across the social arena. You'll see it in the academic arena. They'll usually be suffering, not always, but oftentimes, and then certainly in the emotional arena as well.
So if I'm trying to have a conversation with my kids, because we talk about this all the time at Your Teen, these are important conversations to have preventatively and as life goes on, but our kids are shutting down. So our messaging is like falling on deaf ears. They're just rolling their eyes at us. But I think there are effective ways to communicate if we knew. So you're the keeper of the knowledge. How do we do that?
Well, so there's a great model that I like to use in my webinars and in my talks that was put out by the Center for Motivation and Change. They call it Communicating with Love, LOVE. The L stands for listening, or active listening. So really taking the time to understand where your child is coming from if you engage them in a conversation about this behavior, and take it seriously, right? Because if someone doesn't feel understood, you're not going to be safe to them. That's ultimately at the core of this entire model, what it's about. If you are not an emotionally safe person to them, they're not going to open up. You have to be emotionally safe. The O stands for how you offer advice. And this is a huge issue for a lot of parents who sometimes can be in kind of like a dictatorial or authoritative place, being like, here's what you need to do, here's what's right for you, here's what's not. If you push, the child can push back. And it doesn't mean that sometimes you can't or shouldn't be assertive or put boundaries down, but if you're trying to break into this structure, this mindset they have where there is a lot of armor, you're probably not going to be able to bully your way through. Again, that'll just firm it up more. So the best way to offer advice or guidance is first to ask, is it okay for me to give you some advice? Actually asking permission to say, hey, I've got a thought about this, can I share it with you? That makes the recipient feel like they're owning it because they're literally asking for it, right? It's not that you're putting it on them, they're asking for it. So ask for permission, then offer the advice, and then ask for reactions. Because again, that gives them the opportunity, the agency to say if they agree or don't agree. And even just giving them that opportunity means that they're more likely to take it. So you can also call that a feedback sandwich, where you've got permission, then you offer, then you ask for feedback. The V of love stands for validating. So let someone know that what they're feeling is legitimate. Like if your child is telling you that they're so stressed out about school and they just need to relax, saying, well, you just got to suck it up and deal with it or something, or, well, relaxing is fine, but this is wrong. That's telling someone that what they're feeling is not okay never works, right? Like if you ever said someone you're overreacting and had them be like, you know what, you're right, I am overreacting. No, right? That never happens, not for adults, not for kids. So validate that the way they're feeling is legitimate. And then the E stands for empathizing. Let them know that like you've been in their shoes. They're not alone, you're with them. So if you listen, offer advice in a non-threatening way, validate and empathize, communicate with love, if you keep that up, that's the best way to communicate that you're an emotionally safe person to talk to, which can eventually start to shape a relationship. It's not like an immediate panacea, but it'll get things moving in the right track. And hopefully, if you have persistence, if you don't have the best relationship right now, that will signal to them that maybe they can change.
Thank you. I'm going to take two. One's a comment, one's a question. So Shiva says, I live in the Netherlands and it's a legal natural substance. Just smoking is not allowed until adult age. I don't have a problem. It's interesting that other cultures deal with these so differently. I don't know about the Netherlands, but I remember hearing that, we all talked about the French way with alcohol, and it turns out that's not so great. Do you know anything about the Netherlands? And
well, what I can say just about cultural differences, kind of like what you're alluding to, is that although certainly we have different customs and systems of drug policy around the world, our bodies are pretty similar and they react in different ways. Like with alcohol, for example, if you drink to the point of intoxication for long enough, you're going to develop a physical dependency. It doesn't matter what country you're from. It's just the way our body works. You do that enough, you're going to get cirrhosis, right? That's just, and it's just what happens. For THC, for example, what we're finding is that particularly for young people, particularly for high potency products, which is by and large what's being sold in the United States these days. Weed back at Woodstock was 3 to 4% THC. Now the average here in the US is 21%. So it's like lighting up 7 joints at once. Yeah.
Wow.
A study came out just 6 months ago about that. And then the concentrates and the waxes and the butane hash oil that is so popular with kids in vape pens right now, that can easily be 80-90%. So literally 30 times as strong. What we're finding is that the more potent the product, the more damage it causes, particularly in the prefrontal cortex up here in the front, which is associated with your personality, but also your executive function. So things like your ability to plan, synthesize ideas, task switch, motivation. 85% of studies and a meta-analysis found a structural change to the brain by dosage under the age of 25. And then the other major structure where we see changes are the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain associated with learning and memory. That one, about half of studies that do brain imaging find structural damage from young people who use today's high potency products, both again, the high potency flower as well as the concentrates. So, every parent will make their own decision, but it's not even, Russian roulette, in terms of there only being one bullet in the chamber. I mean, for some parts of the brain, it's like 4 out of the 5 chambers are full. And, it's not necessarily something that I would take lightly as a parent, personally.
Does that discussion resonate with teenagers at all? That you're damaging your body?
You know, it's interesting about that. What I find when I talk to young people about this is that even if there are some more urgent issues about health to talk about, scare tactics aren't the best with kids. You know, like it's not even that you're trying to scare them; it's just the truth. I mean, we haven't even talked about things like cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome and psychotic breaks and all these other things that we're seeing more and more with today's high potency product. But what I tend to do that works a little bit better when I do assemblies or webinars for students is I actually start, and I should preface by saying this is tougher for parents to do. When I'm, coming in as a professional, it's easier to make this argument. But I actually start by talking about the economics. And I do the same thing for vaping nicotine. I talk about how people are actually trying to get rich off of kids because they think that kids are gullible. And this is very, very clear when you look at, for example, the marketing in the marijuana industry, the marketing in the vaping industry, and the fact that all of these tropes that you hear coming out of young people's mouths, like it's just a plant, or isn't it medicine anyway, or it's legal, so it must be fine. Everybody's doing it. All that serves to what's called lower perceived risk. And what everyone in the addiction for profit world knows, and yes, marijuana is absolutely a physically addictive drug, and we can talk more about that if we need to, but everybody knows that the riskier that the public thinks your substance is, the less likely people are to use it. So if you are, say, big tobacco back, in the 1980s, you're going to say that your product doesn't cause cancer. You're going to say that it's not addictive under oath, which is what they did. And if you're marijuana right now in 2020, of course you're going to say that it's not addictive, just like they did. Of course you're going to make unsupported claims about medical benefit. Of course you're going to frame it as just a plant, even though at this point it's basically a genetically modified plant or a very high potency concentrate. So I lead with that. And when I really show them how the marketing works, and they really see how marketing works, and they understand, wow, like I'm actually in the crosshairs here. All of like the pot lollipops and gummy bears and products with names like like OG18 and Platinum Girl Scout Cookie and Layer Cake, all real names, by the way, here in Illinois, that those aren't aimed at 45-year-old marijuana consumers, right? Those are aimed at young people. Then when you start talking about health and say, well, here's why I'm here today talking to you, because I think it's important that you know what's being published in Lancet Psychiatry. I think it's important that you know this stuff. Then they're a little more likely to hear it.
I'm fascinated by that because no one wants to be told they're a pawn in someone's business plan. Yeah. But then because they trust you from that part, they'll listen to the next part. So the order of telling that is so important. That is great. That's great. Okay. So Gretchen says, how can we respond to the teens' assertion that pot is what works best for their anxiety and depression?
Mm-hmm. Well, so a couple ways to look at that. So for some people, it does help, right? I'd be lying if I said it didn't. It's not actually the majority. There's a lot of people. I'm working actually with a young man later today where the marijuana is actually making him more anxious, and that's something that we see a lot. But for someone who actually feels like it is a solution for them, the question then becomes, well, is this actually the best solution for you? And are the risks and the benefits, like how does this work? If I gave you another solution that might solve your problem, but wouldn't potentially cause like structural changes in your brain, that isn't addictive, that wouldn't make you fail a drug test that's required for a job, that would allow you to drive a car safely, would you be interested in that? And that's sometimes, again, it's very dependent on the person, what they'll respond to. But if they're open to it and say, well, yeah, like ultimately what I want is to feel okay. What I want is relief. What I want is to find some measure of peace. If there's another way to skin that cat, they might be open to it. But that's, again, getting to this place where you've got to understand the reason why, and then have good options that are, say, for example, FDA approved, research supported, and in other ways that you can say, well, here, let's sub this in and see how it goes.
Sahar wants to know where she can find the studies that you're citing. She'd love to have that as kind of support when she talks to her daughter.
Yeah, so anyone who's watching, anyone who's listening, feel free to email me, and I'll send you, if there's a specific study that you'd like, I can email you the journal article.
What's your email? I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, it's just Aaron, Aaron, @ weinerphd.com. WEINERPhD.com. And that's also my website if you'd like to learn a little bit more about my work.
Okay, a few more questions. Well, Jilly makes a really good point that it is not just the Netherlands where weed is legal. Some states in our own country have it. How do you feel about the message that legalization gives?
Oh man, so we could talk about this for half an hour just on its own. That's been one of the biggest issues. So prior to starting my own business and going into private practice, I was an administrator for a hospital addiction service line. And quite literally, right after the legalization law passed here in Illinois, I was down in one of our adolescent units, and one of them was saying in group, like, it was, we just legalized it. Everybody's doing it. It must be okay. And that's unfortunately what that message sends. And part of why the process that we're going through here in the United States is harmful to public health. It's not just, say, for example, leveling the playing field with alcohol, which I should mention, by the way, two wrongs don't make a right. And we could talk about that for a while as well. But even if it was, we right now, marijuana is not a substance that is universally accepted as just something that adults or even young people do to recreate or have fun. So when you start to create that permission structure for adults and then by proxy to kids, because they look to adults for cues, then again it's messaging, oh no, this is another substance that you can use to have fun or to relax. This is okay, and our laws are supporting that. So we could talk about that for so long, but it's a big issue. One more anecdote I want to share. I don't know. Am I able to share my screen? Can I do that real quick, or is that not?
Oh, it's gonna take me too long for this recording.
Well, there's so you could find this if you look at my Twitter feed from the past week. But there's an ad going around Chicago right now where literally it's a tin of marijuana superimposed over, it says excellent cannabis, and then behind the tin it literally says the words every day in caps 9 times. Every day, every day, every day. It's not even subliminal. It's just literally telling you to smoke pot every day. And it's mind-blowing to me that this is allowed in our laws. But seeing these advertisements, there's been studies on the ads alone that show exposure to ads raises youth use rate. And also, of course, adult use rate, because that's what ads are for, right? They make you want to buy the product. So we could talk for a long time about this, but it's very unfortunate and very concerning.
Okay, I have one more question, and then Sharon, I'm going to get to your question. And Sahar, it stays on Facebook, so and on LinkedIn and on YouTube, so you can catch it there afterwards. So my question is, does being high on weed affect your driving?
Definitely. 100% it does. And this is we could have an hour-long lecture about it. It not only physiologically affects you in very noticeable ways. Your ability to laterally control your vehicle, judge your speed, see everything on the road. It impacts all of that. But unlike with alcohol, where your BAC means something, THC level in the blood means nothing, because it's a very lipophilic substance. It's attracted to fat. Your brain is 70% fat. So THC goes out of your blood and into your brain within 3 to 4 hours, and it still affects you for quite a long time. For some people, and this is true, I'm not making this up to 24 hours, we still see motor deficits after someone uses a THC product for some people. And so the question of, do you know if you are too high to drive? Do you can you judge your own level of impairment? That's never a good idea, right? Not for alcohol, not for THC. Could a police officer know if you were driving impaired with marijuana? That's also a huge issue. Right now, there are no legally permissible roadside THC tests, essentially. It's based on behaviors only. So there's huge amounts of issues, but yes, the quick answer, the TLDR of this is yes, absolutely. It impacts your ability to drive. And there's a lot of misperceptions about this. I guess the last stat I'll throw out there is that right now 4 times as many kids endorse having either driven high or been in a car with a high driver compared to driven drunk or be in a car with a drunk driver. And that is a huge problem right now.
I mean, the message about drunk driving, I see that's gotten, they've heard it loud and clear, and they'll make arrangements around usage, even adult children, even adults in general. But the message on using weed is not there.
Yeah, and same
that
thing
is
with the
dangerous.
addictive side. Like marijuana is addictive, like alcohol is addictive. You don't get, most people who use don't develop an addiction. Doesn't mean it's not addictive. It grows over time, but we see these same issues and myths that it's not addictive or that it doesn't affect your driving persist, even though all the medical evidence says otherwise.
All right, last question from Sharon. I don't even know how to pronounce this. Can you elaborate? You mentioned it. Can you elaborate more about the hyperemesis syndrome?
Ah, yes. So cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So if you Google it, you'll find out more there as well.
Say it one more time.
uh, Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS for short. There's also a word that goes along with it that's only used for CHS called scromiting, which means screaming and vomiting at the same time. Because what happens here, this is kind of what like a THC overdose looks like. Instead of it suppressing nausea, which THC does at low levels, it creates nausea. It creates vomiting. That's what hyperemesis means. And so basically the syndrome is you are vomiting constantly and you are in severe abdominal pain, hence the scromiting, the screaming and the vomiting. And it's something that actually it can kill you. If you Google that as well, you'll find that teenagers have literally vomited themselves to death from dehydration. And if you talk to any emergency room doctors, they'll talk. They've all seen it. They all know what it looks like. You hook someone up to an IV so that they don't get dehydrated, and you wait. Basically, the only thing that you can do maybe is we found that a warm compress around the abdomen sometimes helps with the pain, or a warm shower. That's what sometimes people do if they're trying to treat themselves at home. But it's an issue that tripled in Colorado after legalization. There was a study published about that in 2019 because the marijuana becomes so much more potent and so much more available in those potent forms once you legalize.
Dr. Aaron Weiner, I can't thank you enough. This was really so helpful, so much great information. And to everybody listening, like we all just have to figure out how to beat this. And hopefully some of the tips that we've gotten from Dr. Weiner are going to help you and your family. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.